Hello, welcome back to another episode of Our Years.
This is Barry.
I'm Rima.
The other day, Rima and I were actually talking about how we met in grad school. And it's kind of funny because we were talking about how we actually bonded over the struggles of finding a job in the US.
Yeah, I don't miss that part of my life.
It truly was such a stressful time.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand, or I think people underestimate how much stress we go through, especially as international people.
Love that. I love that. Yeah, I think it's, in theory, it's going to be tough, but then actually going through it is so stressful because also as international people, you have a lot of visa dependencies that have to be done in a certain time frame. So I think it's that more than anything that adds to the stress of it, the timeline.
For sure. And I think also what made us so stressed out about it is that we didn't have any guidance when we came to the States, right?
Yeah.
I think, at least for me, when I came here, I didn't really know anyone. Looking for a job was hard because of that. I didn't have anyone that I could go to for advice or guidance on how to navigate on finding a job in the US.
Yeah. I had friends who had moved here before me, but the kind of jobs that they had applied for were very different. Some of them were creative, some of them were in different fields. So just nobody was in the same field that I was in, so that added to just the unknowns of it.
That's true.
And I had a very nice support system. I had really nice friends and my family was very supportive, so that helps. But they can't help me with the actual tactical work on what has to be done. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, like, for me, I think I was the only Taiwanese in engineering management is the degree that Rima and I did. And I think it's so interesting because people come to the US in search of like an engineering job or like STEM.
Yeah.
Like I guess maybe it's a culture in Taiwan that people don't really have PMs in any sort of field in Taiwan. Maybe it's becoming a little bit more popular now in Taiwan.
Yeah.
But when I first came to the States, that was not a common role at any sort of company in Taiwan.
Okay, yeah. There were many Indians that I knew who were in similar roles, but I didn't have them in my network. So I think that was also why it felt more isolating.
Yeah. So the reason that we wanted to do this episode is almost like Rima and I thought it would be a good way to kind of spread our, I guess, experience.
Wisdom.
I wouldn't call it wisdom.
Collected wisdom.
Yeah, but kind of just share what Rima and I had learned throughout the process of looking for a job in the US because we didn't have that sort of guidance and advice. And so we're hoping that an episode like this might help other people.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe we should give context on what we currently do. So this would also help people who are in those lines of jobs. So I'm a program manager at a fintech startup. And so what that means is my programs or projects are typically focused on data science, AI/ML, and data engineering.
Yeah. So similarly, I'm also a PM program manager in big tech. I currently focus on driving timelines, etc., for hardware. So I think it's a little different.
Yeah,
the two
it's very different.
Yeah, but I think general sense is the same in that like project management. I guess the overall realm is like in order to drive a project forward, they need people like us to manage the cross-functional team in order to get results.
Yeah. Our friends keep joking about how that behavior is sort of seeping into our personal life as well. Because yesterday we went karaokeing with some friends and Barry sent out a calendar invite for the karaoke party.
Correct.
And they were all like, Barry's become unhinged.
But to be honest, it actually helps with your like daily life, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm not going to remember everything in my personal life. We need a calendar invite.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm very pro this behavior.
I'm also pro this behavior. I think a lot of people appreciate that. So.
I like how we're just validating each other.
We don't need these people.
No, we don't. We don't need the DRS.
Correct. So yeah, Rima and I kind of like put together, we were like brainstorming and we put together a list of 10 things that we wish we knew before job hunting.
Yeah.
Or kind of just reflecting on the sort of things we went through and what we could have done better.
Yeah, if I could go back in time and tell myself this is what I would tell myself.
Correct.
So the first point that I wrote down was don't self-reject. A lot of the job descriptions that I was looking at, I was really interested in the role, but the description seemed ambitious. And so I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this
Right.
job.
And then you ended up not even like applying for the
Yeah,
job.
yeah. I was self-rejecting a lot, and then
That's a good one.
yeah. So I feel like I had to consciously tell myself to not do that.
Yeah.
And I did have an offer from a company that I never thought I'd get into. So it was just
100%.
and then I'm just like, how many more offers could I have got if I had just not self-rejected?
Exactly. I think that's such a good point because my role actually, before I didn't apply for the role that I'm currently in. So when I chatted to someone in my current company about this role, they were like, they only like to hire people who are experienced. And it was interesting because on the job description, it also said that. So it was saying like something like experienced program managers with 5+ years working in certain field. And I was just like, that is definitely not me. Like, why would they want this? And so I didn't apply for it at all, but they ended up reaching out to me for this exact role. And so to your point about don't self-reject, right?
Yeah.
Like you could have hopped on that bandwagon ages ago if you didn't like self-sabotage.
Yeah. I feel like more women tend to do this. I don't know. I think there's, for some reason, I've seen this trend where in my circle, more women tend to self-reject than men. So yeah, basically don't do that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think even people who are experienced also still think that. I remember chatting to my brother and he was like, there's no way he would get this job. Also the same thing as like, kind of self-rejecting. And I was like, don't even look at the job description. Like obviously it's a guidance for what they're looking for, but typically it's very generalized, right? So as long as you can showcase that you have the skills and the abilities to do the job, I'm sure that they'll take you into consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the worst that'll happen? You don't get in.
Exactly.
What's that Michael Scott quote? You miss 100% of the chances you don't take.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, the other thing that we wrote down is applying on the websites of companies that you're interested in, or using LinkedIn Easy Apply rarely leads to a callback.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I feel like what I have learned the most in the process, and this is honestly like unfiltered, but I applied for something like 170 jobs and roles while I was in the process of job hunting. And from those 170, I'd say like less than 10% actually called me back.
Yeah.
But I found effective afterwards when I changed my strategy was that I went and messaged people on LinkedIn and connected with people and had coffee chats set up with them. And I think that was what actually got me in the door and started chatting with people who were actually hiring.
Yeah. To your point on coffee chats and just cold messaging people on LinkedIn, people are so nice. I was shocked
Really?
by how incredibly resourceful and helpful people were when I reached out to them. They didn't owe me anything.
Yep.
I was basically a virtual stranger reaching out to them, but they went above and beyond to talk to me about the role, the company, and even refer me. Yep. So I'm really very... that was an eye-opener for me about how generous people can be. And actually, it was one girl who actually referred me to a role. I also told her that I was shocked by how helpful she was, and I was really grateful. But I was almost like, why are you doing this? And she said that when she was in the same boat that I am in, and a few years earlier, and a lot of people had helped her. So this is her way of paying it forward. And I was like, yeah, that's another thing. That's also almost ties back to self-rejection, where you don't want to reach out to people because you're so sure nobody would want to talk to you.
Right.
But they really came through.
Yeah, definitely. I think also for me, like in the process of job hunting, when I was reaching out to people on LinkedIn, I think people are just generally so kind. And I think one thing I do want to put like an asterisk there is that because we were so passionate about finding a job and finding a job that we were interested and passionate about, I think they saw that come through. Obviously, I don't want to put it out there and be like every single person you meet on LinkedIn is
that's also a numbers game.
Right.
You'll probably reach out to like 10 folks and maybe 1 or 2 will respond to you.
Yeah. But I think my point is that like if you're not passionate about your job, if you're not interested in the actual job you're looking for, and you're just purely applying for it because it's a company that sounds good, that's not going to land, right? And so you can't expect people to help you out in that sense, right? I think people help people out who are really interested in something or they're really passionate about something, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the sort of people want to hire. And so just make sure that despite like looking for people on LinkedIn and setting up coffee chats with them, like it's just important to first understand what you're looking for, make sure that is what you want, because it really comes through during the coffee chats.
Yeah, for sure.
Third one is resumes, I think this is a big one. I think when I first started applying for jobs, so obviously first step to applying for a job is getting your resume sorted. I think back in the day when I first started job searching, I heard all sorts of advice saying that your resume, you should stand out in your resume.
Okay.
And so formatting, you should make it pretty or like make it unique.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so interesting because maybe this worked back in the day when there wasn't so much like
this applicant tracking system.
Yes,
Yeah.
like filtering out using automated systems, right?
Yeah.
I think now it's so, because of especially the industry that we're going into, like it's like these big companies, they don't have time to filter out like 100 to 1,000 resumes a day, right? So they have these automated systems, as you were saying. And I think it's because of this shift that now I've pivoted into updating my resume to something that's so bland and that's so like straightforward, factual.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually really important because actually these hiring managers don't have time to go through your resume, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have a format that is different to everybody else's, it's not easy to read, it's hard actually for them to pick out all the key points that make them want to hire
Yeah, they
you.
probably reject that just on the base of the effort it would take to go through that resume.
Correct. Yeah, so that's also something I learned throughout my years of job searching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throughout the year, I know it felt like years back, but it was like a few months.
No, before that, when my first job.
Okay.
So back then, I had made my template very different to everybody else. I actually used Canva, and Canva has like an area that has like special templates for like resumes. And sure, I think those work for if you're at a boutique design company or like if you're at a small startup.
Yeah.
Sure, they make you stand out. But if you're trying to apply for like all these jobs across the board and like,
and you're doing it en masse.
Yes, that's not gonna land well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one that I learned. And pro tip is when I was at Cornell, someone told me to use the MBA school's templates, and you can easily grab that off of the MBA school's website.
Yeah.
And that was super helpful for me. That template was already there, and it's kind of you just editing it and adding in your details, right?
Yeah.
Obviously I tweaked it as I went by, as I chatted to like different people and have had my friends like kind of review my resume. And then another tip that I got from an online kind of coach on LinkedIn, he said that a good way, especially in program management, is calling out the key highlights. So for example, leadership, communication, collaboration.
Yeah.
And so what I did was like I used those keywords and then I wrote like 2-3 points in star form what I did to highlight my particular skill in leadership or my particular skill in collaboration.
Yeah, that's a good one. I did that too, and I got a lot of positive feedback after doing that.
For sure.
And just highlighting the impact that particular category brought about was also very useful. But yeah, on the thing about templates, I didn't realize what an applicant tracking system was until I moved here, and I didn't realize that there are certain keywords that I can use on my resume that will actually help parsing resumes through these automated systems much more easier. And so then there are also a lot of templates online on what can you do is to make your resume ATS friendly or applicant tracking system friendly. So definitely look at that. So if I could go back and tell myself to just use what's available and not reinvent the wheel constantly, that's what I would do.
And this is another pro tip is if you can use keywords from the job description itself.
Yes.
Like if the job description says collaborate with cross-functional team, use the word collaborate, use cross-functional team. Like obviously don't copy word for word from the job description, but highlight the key words that are exactly in there. Don't lie about it, obviously, because whatever
they'll
you put
find
on,
out.
Yes, obviously whatever you put on your resume should be very accurate and representative of who you are. But if that is something you're good at, take the word from the job description, because that ultimately is what they use for the tracking system.
Especially with AI now, it's so easy to actually just feed in the job description and have your customize your resume for it. We were unfortunately applying pre-AI days, so we had to like manually write it down, but now we have GPT for it.
Rima, you're reflecting the age of us. I mean, let's just clarify that Rima is actually older than I am.
Yeah, so. I think you've clarified that enough at this point. If anything has been clarified, it is that. So we are aware. Okay, so we did talk about networking a little bit in our previous points, but I think we should talk about what worked for us
Yes.
when it comes to networking.
Yeah. Something particularly effective, I think, was actually reaching out to people on LinkedIn, cold messaging people. And as uncomfortable as that is at the very beginning,
Yeah.
it works. Like, don't let people rejecting you or not messaging you back like set you off track, right? Like, I think out of the 10 people that you message, at least one person will be nice and will reply to you.
Yeah.
And even if they don't, just continue.
Yeah, and I think then it's a quality over quantity thing, because even one person
Right.
responding to you is so useful. So you should definitely do that. Even if you just get the one response, so useful.
Yeah. And like, just to preface what we mean by coffee chat is like you being someone who is genuinely interested in the role they're in, right? So I would suggest, like, obviously, for example, if I was looking for a program management job, I'd search on LinkedIn program management, particularly in the companies that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And then I'll reach out to people in that exact role and then tell them that I'm very interested in this job, why I'm interested, and why I think I would be a good fit, and ask for a coffee chat. I think typically people are very passionate about their jobs, will respond,
Yeah.
right? And they want to see people also thrive in the same role they're in, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that was one of the most effective ways that I think I got to networking.
Yeah.
And maintaining the relationships after you've reached out and created an opportunity through coffee chats.
I think the one, like you talked about how you get to know more about a role in coffee chats, and the way that helped me is I realized I actually don't want to do certain jobs.
That is
once I
true.
started talking
That
to
is
people.
true.
So I was interested in roles that were more tactical rather than strategy focused. So a lot of that doesn't come across in job descriptions. So when I actually had coffee chats with people who were in those similar roles, I realized, oh, I don't even want this job.
Exactly.
And so that was also a useful, I didn't think of that would be something I got out of a coffee chat, but that was useful.
For sure. And good point on that, because as you go through a coffee chat, you find out so much about that, not only that role, but also that company, right? Because I think through the coffee chats, they sometimes give you a little bit of information about their role and the dynamic that is within their role, right? And to your point, I think that also tells you whether or not you'd be interested in this company or this particular role.
Yeah. So, the other useful thing about coffee chats is you also learn a lot about company culture that typically doesn't come across on job description. So that's also very useful.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I cannot stress this point enough, is that when you're interviewing, right, it's not just them interviewing you, but it's also the other way around, right? Like, you want to make sure that this is a job that you want and that you will feel like you can thrive and grow. And like, you don't want to go into this company for like a year or two and be like, oh, it's not a good fit for me, right? Like, that's like kind of wasting your time, wasting the company's time. You want to set yourself on a path where you can maximize your growth.
I think coffee chats are a really useful way to get that information.
Yeah. So in one of the classes like that we took, the lecturer was actually stressing the importance of mock interviews. And as important as those are, what I learned in the process is that in addition to setting up mock interviews with your friends, which lets you practice, I think a really good way to set you up for success in the interview for a job you really want is kind of making sure that you're scheduling your interviews in a strategic way. And what I mean by that is, for example, I would strategically schedule my least priority interviews into the front. So I like at the very beginning of my interview, like my interview like process across different companies.
Almost to build like the muscle for interviewing.
Correct.
Right?
I think for me, that was like a way to, in reality, practice interviewing for the job that you actually really want. So for example, I would obviously have like a list of from high to low priority of companies that I wanted to work for. And so I would strategically schedule my lower priority. Not that I didn't want to go to that company. I was still very interested in that company. It's just that that was not the highest on my list.
Yeah, makes sense.
I would schedule those first and then use that as a way to practice so that I could kind of fine-tune my responses to questions that the interviewers ask. Obviously, it differs from interview to interview in terms of what questions they ask. But to some extent, it's pretty general, and it kind of helps you think on the spot and kind of know how to respond accordingly. And you kind of like self-reflect from those and kind of improve for the next ones.
Yeah. In terms of mock interviews, we were doing a lot with our classmates and friends, but there are also applications on and websites online that you can actually read, like people will sign up to conduct mock interviews, and they're they're in the industry, and they typically do it because they want to be coaches or they want to be mentors. So you can also sign up on those websites. I think I use something called Pramp, and I was able to do interviews with people in the industry, and I didn't even know about that. I didn't even know about such services before, and it was free.
I had no idea. Oh wow,
I was on student
free?
budget. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I had no idea of that.
Yeah. Okay, the next point is regards to the actual interview process.
I think, like, I cannot stress enough that people must come prepared. I think a lot of people think being prepared is just doing basic research, you know, on like what sort of questions will be asked. But I think it's so important to become like so well versed in your responses or like how you would react to a certain question that really, in my opinion, that really helps come across that you are confident and you know what you're talking about and you are someone that they want to hire.
Yeah.
I think one of the things is like doing your research, right? I think it's really important to come prepared, having done your research on what sort of questions might be asked in an interview. And honestly, there are so many resources where you can find these questions, and so many people are actually willing to share their experiences during interviews. Like Reddit's a good one, Glassdoor is a good one, Team Blind is a good one. I found all the questions to very similar questions to what I actually got asked in my interviews through these platforms.
Yeah. Memory, I have a few on Team Blind researching. And then back in the day, I don't know if Blind still has it, but there's a ticker at the bottom. There used to be a ticker at the bottom that had salaries that people were getting.
And it's just Rima and I texting each other and being like,
millions?
Who's paying 5 million? No, I'm kidding. 500K
yeah.
for a role.
Yeah.
I was just like, that is wild.
I was like, where are these roles?
Not us.
Can't be. Yeah. Can't be us.
But yes, like there are so many places, and obviously I'm just listing a few. There are a lot more resources. I think Fishbowl is also one where people just like, you know, are happy to post about their experiences at a company interviewing for a certain role.
Yeah. So I think when you think about interview preparation, typically people only think of, say, the technical questions and so on, right? But I think one way of preparing is also researching on why you'd be a good fit for the company.
For sure.
Because when I started interviewing, a lot of interviewers asked me why I should be hired for this role. And in the first few interviews, I wasn't expecting that. So I was sort of like rambling, oh, I'm a good team player and stuff like that, which is nonsense at the end of the day, because how does that differentiate me from anybody else applying for that job, right? Yeah. And so that preparation is also why are you a good fit for this role. Definitely. And not just can you pass the technical questions. The way I use that going forward was that in interviews, when they'd ask me if I have questions for them, I'd actually tell them why I think I'm a good fit and if they agree. Right. And it also helps you gauge on how you're doing in the interview process, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and going back to the point about like you also trying to see if you're a good fit. It's not only them trying to see if you're a good fit, right? Yeah. It's like a two-way street.
Yeah.
In addition to that, about your points about standing out, not only is it technical questions, right? I think employers are also trying to see if you have good emotional intelligence. I think that is a really big one for standing out in a crowd where everybody literally has the exact same resume, right? It's so competitive, especially when you're from like all these high achieving schools. All the resumes look actually very similar, right? And how do you stand out? Like you can only do that through interviews, right? And so interviews are really an opportunity for you to show your character, to show your personality, to show the value that you bring to the team in addition to what is already shown on your resume.
Yeah. To your point about interviews are not just you interviewing for this role, but you're also seeing if you're a good fit for the company. This is something that I wish I could go back and tell myself, is to actually have culture as a consideration in how I prioritize a company on whether I want to interview for them or not. Because I don't think I prioritized it enough when I was interviewing.
Really?
And it makes a huge difference to your actual job, right? You're going to be spending the better part of your life in this job. So
Yeah.
it's really important to be part of a team and part of an environment that you can actually thrive in,
Yeah.
and to work with people who are good advocates for you, who respect your work. I feel like I didn't prioritize that enough while I was interviewing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You mentioned that it was like through that process that you learned that you need to prioritize culture and fit for culture.
Yeah.
I think maybe because for me, when I was doing my master's, my previous master's was that in a lab where I was doing research. I think it was a very similar setting where you would work on a team and you would report to a boss, right? And like the culture of the team or the team dynamic is really important. And so going into looking for a job, that was something that I definitely considered. I think especially when I was job searching this time round, there were a couple of offers that I had, but what really led me to decide on one particular role or team was because of the team dynamic, or the impression I got from the team dynamic during the interviews, because I had like a panel of interviews, and I actually, and pro tip, I actually asked them all the same questions. And what really surprised me is that every single person had the same, or it was very similar answers, and that made me feel like, and it was a question about team dynamic, and they had very similar answers, which made me realize that that is what it was actually in the team.
Yeah, it must be true, because how
It
can
must be
everyone
true,
have
right,
the same
right.
response?
And
Yeah.
it was like very, like it was one after the next, right? It wasn't as if they were in the same room.
Okay.
So I think to me, I was just like, wow, this is the team I want to be in because it's so consistent.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting because obviously I did the same for other roles in different companies, and it wasn't the same. Everybody had a different thing to say.
Yeah.
And so as of today, I am very grateful because I think my team has a great dynamic.
Yeah, I think the thing about culture is maybe when you're interviewing for jobs, you're just like, oh, I just want a job. You know, I want a certain comp, and that's what's important.
Yes.
Or I want to be in a particular place, and that's what's
Yeah,
important.
it's not just
location is important, but it's not just that, because you're going to have to actually do the job once
Exactly.
you get in.
Exactly.
And if you hate your boss and you hate your team, there's only so much time you're going to spend in
100%.
that job, and you're going to be miserable. So yeah, I wish I could. I mean, luckily I landed a job where the culture is amazing, and it worked out for me. But I also have friends who are struggling in their careers, not because they're incompetent, but because they're in places of work where culture is not great. They
For
don't have
sure.
advocates for
Yeah.
who are, they don't have people who are advocating for them. They just like don't like their coworkers, or they don't like the team dynamic, and that really matters when you're in a job.
No, for sure. And I actually think that that makes or breaks whether or not you want to stay in that particular role or within that company, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, you can be passionate about that job and that company, but at the end of the day, if your team isn't a great team that you enjoy working with, that's really going to make your life miserable at work, and you're not going to look forward to waking up every day to work,
Yeah.
right? So the next one that we spoke about is the way you answer questions during interviews. I think this one is a pretty big one, and we actually practice this a lot when we were in engineering management, and I think it really helped me. So it is the STAR method, and I think there's different forms of it. I think PAR is also one, but anyway, I use the STAR one, which is situation, task, action, and results. So that is essentially, and you can search this on Google, but it's pretty straightforward. What you do is, what scenario was it that you had to deal with? What action was required, or what task was required? And then what you did in order to get results. I think this is a good way to answer questions because it shows your logic during interviews, and also just helps make so that you don't ramble. It helps make you explaining and communicating what you achieved in the past very direct and very straightforward.
Yeah, I think interviewing is also muscle that you can build.
Truly.
You know, you
Yeah.
have these frameworks, and you have these methods that you can actually use to, like you said, stop rambling. And this is also one thing that you can do in your mock interview. So even if it's not
Yes.
technical, the one thing you can learn is coming up with a framework on how you answer something, because that also shows critical thinking.
Yep.
And eloquence.
For
So,
sure.
yeah.
For sure. And like, I think what I did particularly is that, as I was mentioning, you do your research on what sort of questions will be asked in interviews. So for example, how do you deal with conflict? So what I would do is I would use the STAR method and write out 3 examples that I've experienced in the past, and write them out in a table, so that depending on the question that is being asked, I can just pick one out of there and speak directly to it during an interview.
Yeah, I think that also helps for you to think of different examples that you can use, because that also shows the experience that you've
Exactly.
had, right? And that really, like, the way you answer brings that out.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think what I would definitely recommend everybody does is like before an interview, in preparation for it, you kind of like do a whole lot of star examples to different questions actually.
Yeah.
The last things that we wanted to mention, but we think is one of the most important
Yeah.
is negotiations. I think that is like one of the key things that you really need to consider in the process of job hunting, right? And going back to my point about being prepared and doing your research, I think this is one that is particularly important where you need to do your research so that you don't get lowballed.
Yeah, 100%. And we took this class, it was a negotiations class in business school. And I think at one point the professor was like, say a company is offering a job and the comp they're offering is 150K. So he started off the class as, what would you negotiate on top of? Most people did like a percentage over that, right? And he's like, why not ask for 300K? And I was like, we can.
I think that's so interesting because we come from like what I want to say an immigrant mindset is where like we're afraid to ask because we don't think we deserve.
Yeah, or you don't even know you can.
Exactly, and that's why research is so important. When going back to your point about seeing the tickers at the bottom of Team Blind, that's when I was just like, people are getting paid this much for this role? I mean, come on, I should be asking for this, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think one of the things is when you are at the process of chatting about your salary or your pay with your employer, I think it's really important to not mention one particular number that you want, but like obviously give them a range and don't ask them for what they're offering, right? You should be like, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And is that something that your company is looking to pay for this role?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a conversation. It's not like if you don't give me this number, I'm a bounce.
Right.
It is a conversation that you need to have. And I think a lot of times people are just scared to have the conversation because
it's an uncomfortable
conversation. It is an uncomfortable conversation. And I think there's also just on some level this fear that if I come across as if I'm asking for too much, they'll just rescind the offer.
Right.
I think there's also
I don't think anyone has actually rescinded the offer, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, like I said, it's a conversation.
Correct.
And I think the negotiation is not just about pay. It could be on so many other factors, like whether it's a remote job versus going in, whether you have other benefits. It's a range of negotiations. It's not just comp. And so I think that's also an important consideration, that there are other variables that you could negotiate.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also add on top of that, like you just got to be confident about yourself and know your worth. I think I've chatted to a lot of people and they're just afraid to ask because they don't feel like they're worth that money. And to be honest, you are. And what has gotten you so far is because you work so hard to get here, right? So why are you not confident in what you can bring to the table? I think that is what really made a difference for me, right? Like, I think as soon as you start feeling confident about the value that you can bring to a team, that's when you can confidently ask for a certain range of pay.
Yeah, definitely negotiate your starting salary as an international person because that calibrates your future raises and promotions. So it almost dictates what your career trajectory is going to be in terms of compensation.
Yeah.
So it's very important that you do that.
For sure. Another point I think of when negotiating is having leverage. And what I mean by that is if you have offers on your hand, right? I think that's a really great way for employers to feel like they need to give you a certain pay, right?
Right.
I think when I was in the process of interviewing and I managed to kind of schedule my interviews so that I got offers around the same time. I think that really gave me a lot of leverage to negotiate with different companies, right?
Yeah.
Like telling them, like I'm about to close this deal or I have this offer that they're pushing me for. So I really need to make a decision, but I'd really like to work for your company. So I think I would like to work here, but it's not actually meeting what I'm expecting to get paid for. And so using all your other offers in your back pocket as a way to make that or pitch that to them, I think is really important.
Yeah, it also shows how competent you are, right? That you have all these other offers.
Correct.
So it's definitely a good negotiation tactic.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another way is that a lot of people actually feel like they get ghosted by these employers after their interviews, right? Mm-hmm. I think having the other offers also, in addition, helps them push the timeline so that you're trying to close these offers as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So yeah, but also I don't want to discourage those who don't have other offers, right? Just because you don't have other offers doesn't mean that you won't be able to negotiate, right? I think there are other ways that you can negotiate, like showing your experience or any sort of portfolio that you have, right? Or like kind of, I think just being confident in yourself is a big one, and just knowing your worth.
Yeah, we were lucky that we were able to get multiple offers and we could pick, where we wanted to work. And maybe not everyone has that.
Yeah. But don't be discouraged. I think still feel confident about yourself. You're worth a lot. You're worth more than you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I do not miss interviewing.
Dude, interviewing was just so much stress for me. Especially because we came to the States in search of something that would help us grow in our careers more than what we had back home, right?
Yeah. We also graduated right after COVID which was tough. The job market wasn't great. A lot of layoffs were already starting and people had stopped hiring.
Yeah.
So there were hiring freezes in multiple companies. So yeah, it wasn't the best time, but
yeah, but we made it.
Inshallah.
And we're here now.
Yeah.
So everybody will get to this point, so don't be discouraged, stay confident, stay motivated and driven, and you'll get there. We're also very happy to jump on calls with people. So if you have questions, feel free to email us. We'll drop our email somewhere in our Spotify, or you can find it on our page, and we'd be happy to answer questions. But yeah, also let us know your thoughts on, or if you have any additional advice for those out there that are looking for jobs.
Yeah, if you're currently in the job market, let us know on what you're seeing and if any of these tips helped you. Closing thoughts, it is a process. It's a shitty process, but you'll get through it. And you'll go out the other side so much better than when you started interviewing, and it'll be okay.
Yeah. And also at the end of the day, if you don't get the job that you really wanted, I always say to myself, it wasn't meant to be for you, and that something better is in place. What?
Ying fan?
Yuan fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, what's meant for you will be there. And so if it's tough feeling rejected when you don't get the job that you really want.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm sure that something better is in store for you.
So yeah, lean into your support system. It's, like I said, a process, but you'll be okay.
Yeah. And that's how Rima and I bonded.
Oh yeah. I cried a lot.
She did. I think this was actually the first time I saw her cry. And I think that created our stronger bond because we both understood what each other were going through. And so, yeah, I think we're good to wrap up for today.
Yeah. See you.
See ya.